In the heart of a bustling city, in a mansion that seemed to touch the clouds, lived one of the wealthiest men in the country. He was a billionaire, a man whose name carried power, respect, and fear in the business world. Every decision he made, whether in his companies or in his personal life, was calculated and precise. People admired him for his success, but they also knew he was strict, sharp, and not someone to be easily impressed. At home, he expected nothing less than perfection from everyone around him, including his family. His son, a young man in his late 20s, was everything a father could be proud of. Handsome, ambitious, and well-educated, he had grown up in privilege, learning from his father's successes and mistakes. Yet, unlike his father, he had a kind heart and a sense of humility that made him approachable to everyone, not just those with wealth or power. He was loved by friends, family, and colleagues, and everyone believed he would continue the family legacy with honor. One day, the son introduced a woman into his life who had completely changed him. She was not from a wealthy background, nor did she live a life of luxury. In fact, her life was simple, filled with ordinary struggles that most people could relate to. But she had something the billionaire's son valued more than money: kindness, intelligence, and a courage that shone through even in the smallest of actions. The young man was drawn to her honesty and her ability to see people for who they truly were, not just for what they owned. The billionaire father, however, was skeptical. From the very beginning, he observed the young woman with sharp eyes, analyzing every word, every gesture, and every smile. To him, she seemed too ordinary, too simple, too naive for his son. She does not belong in our world, he often thought, shaking his head in disbelief. To him, intelligence was measured by business acumen, social grace, and the ability to navigate high society, and he saw none of that in her. Despite his initial doubts, the son insisted that she was special, that she had qualities that could not be measured by wealth or status. But the father's pride and arrogance made it difficult for him to see beyond appearances. He believed that love alone was not enough to survive in a world full of power, competition, and cunning people. He worried that she might make mistakes that could harm his son's future, or worse, embarrass the family. The household, a place usually governed by strict rules and protocols, suddenly became a stage for subtle tension. The staff whispered about the new fiancée, noting the father's skeptical glances and the son's protective demeanor. Even family friends noticed the difference in the atmosphere. Every family dinner, every casual conversation, seemed to carry an unspoken question: would the young woman fit into this world of immense wealth and expectation, or would she falter under the pressure? Despite the father's doubts, the young woman remained herself. She did not try to impress or manipulate, and she did not let the father's harsh words or judgment affect her. She treated everyone with respect, from the chauffeurs to the housekeepers, and she spoke to the son with warmth and understanding. Her sincerity was evident, and while the billionaire father was slow to admit it, he began to notice small things about her that were unusual in the people he usually met. Even in her simple actions, there was a quiet intelligence. She listened carefully, spoke thoughtfully, and seemed to understand situations in ways that others did not. Where others tried to show off their knowledge or connections, she quietly solved problems and offered practical solutions. While the father initially dismissed these moments as coincidence, they began to plant seeds of curiosity in his mind. Perhaps, he thought reluctantly, there was more to her than met the eye. The tension between the father's wealth-driven judgment and the fiancée's humble intelligence set the stage for a story that would challenge assumptions, test patience, and ultimately reveal that true value is not always visible at first glance. In this wealthy, opulent mansion, the clash between old-world pride and new-world wisdom had just begun, and neither the father nor anyone else in the family could predict the lessons they were about to learn from someone they had underestimated. The day finally arrived when the young woman would meet the billionaire father for the first time. The son had warned her that his father was not easy to impress, that he had a sharp tongue and an even sharper mind, and that he didn't tolerate mistakes. Despite this warning, she remained calm. She knew who she was, and she was determined to face the challenge with grace and dignity. She had spent years learning to navigate difficult situations, and while this was different, she felt ready. The mansion itself was breathtaking, a testament to the family's immense wealth. High ceilings, glittering chandeliers, and priceless artwork filled every room. She walked through the halls quietly, trying not to let her nerves show. The staff moved around her silently, aware of the tension in the air. Everyone seemed to know that this encounter was going to be memorable, though no one could guess exactly how. When they entered the dining room, the father was already there, sitting at the head of the long, polished table. His posture was perfect, his expression unreadable, and his eyes, sharp and calculating, focused on her the moment she stepped inside. There was a silence that felt heavier than the chandeliers above. The son gave her a reassuring smile and introduced her to his father, but the billionaire did not respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, examining her as if she were a puzzle to solve. "Sit," he said finally, his voice calm but commanding. She obeyed, her hands folded neatly on her lap. He studied her again, his eyes flicking from her face to her clothes to the way she carried herself. Then, with a chuckle that seemed more like a test than amusement, he said, "So, you are the one my son is so fond of?" Interesting choice." The words were polite, but the tone was sharp, dripping with hidden judgment. She felt the sting but refused to react. Instead, she smiled softly and replied with confidence, "Yes, sir. I care for your son very much, and I hope to show that I can be someone worthy of your family's trust." Her calm response surprised him. He had expected nervousness, hesitation, or even fear, but not confidence. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Trust is earned, not given. Tell me, what makes you different from any other young woman who might seek my son's attention?" She paused, considering her words carefully. "I may not have wealth or influence, sir, but I believe in honesty, hard work, and respect. I treat people well, not because of what they can give me, but because it is the right thing to do. And I love your son for who he is, not for his money or status," she said, her voice steady and sincere. The father's lips curved into a small smile, almost imperceptible, as if he were amused by her boldness. But then, with a slight laugh, he said something that made the air in the room shift, "You are foolish. Do you really think those qualities will survive in a world ruled by power, money, and cunning?" The words struck like a cold wind. Even the son looked concerned, unsure how she would react. For a moment, the room was silent, heavy with tension. Then, she did something unexpected. She did not shrink, argue, or cry. She simply looked at him with unwavering eyes and said, "Sir, maybe I am foolish in your eyes, but sometimes what you call foolishness is courage. And sometimes, courage can change everything." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, a quiet defiance that was impossible to ignore. The father leaned back, his mind racing. He had met countless people in his life, many of them clever, manipulative, and ambitious. Few had spoken to him with such honesty, such fearlessness. For the first time, he realized that perhaps he had underestimated her. The rest of the dinner continued, but the mood had changed. He observed her closely, noting how she treated the staff with kindness, how she asked thoughtful questions, and how she responded to his probing remarks with composure. Every little detail, every simple gesture, seemed to add weight to the impression she was making. By the end of the meal, the father had not yet admitted it, but something inside him had shifted. That night, the young woman left the mansion with her head held high, unaware of the ripple she had caused in the father's mind. She had survived the first test, and in doing so, she had planted the first seeds of doubt, respect, and curiosity in a man who had judged her too quickly. The billionaire father, alone in his study later that evening, replayed every moment of the dinner in his mind. He realized, reluctantly, that this encounter was only the beginning, and that he had no idea how profoundly this young woman would affect his life and the life of his family. After the tense dinner, everyone in the mansion expected the young woman to crumble under the father's harsh words and judgment. They expected her to apologize, to retreat quietly, or to argue back in fear or frustration. But she surprised them all. She did none of those things. Instead, she remained calm, composed, and quietly confident, showing a strength that could not be measured by wealth or social status. The next few days were filled with small but telling moments. The billionaire father, known for his critical nature, would occasionally make comments designed to provoke her or test her patience. He would question her choices, laugh at her mistakes, or imply that she was unfit for his son. Most people in her position would have felt intimidated, embarrassed, or angry. But she did not react with fear or defensiveness. She listened carefully, responded thoughtfully, and maintained her dignity at all times. Her calm response was not weakness, it was strategy, intelligence, and self-respect combined. She understood that trying to argue with a man who had built an empire from power and wealth would only create conflict. Instead, she chose to show her value through action, through quiet observation, and through her consistent respect for everyone around her. She treated the staff with kindness, greeted family friends warmly, and never let the father's harsh words change her behavior. The son watched her closely during these days. He had always admired her patience and understanding, but now he saw a new side to her. It was one thing to survive the father's criticism once, it was another to remain unshaken day after day, in the face of repeated doubt and subtle insults. She had a strength he had never seen before, and it made him respect her even more. Even the father, for all his pride and arrogance, could not help but notice. He saw how she handled conversations with ease, how she made others feel comfortable, and how she never allowed anger or fear to dictate her actions. Every calm response she gave was like a small puzzle piece, slowly forming an image of someone far wiser and more capable than he had imagined. He tried to dismiss it, telling himself that these were minor qualities and that her background would eventually reveal her limits. Yet, deep down, he could not ignore the quiet power she radiated. One afternoon, there was a small incident that became a turning point. A delivery had arrived with the wrong paperwork, and the staff were panicked, unsure how to fix it. The father, who was in his study, called out instructions sharply, but the situation only became more chaotic. Without hesitation, the young woman stepped in. She calmly reviewed the documents, made clear decisions, and delegated tasks to resolve the problem efficiently. Within minutes, what had been a stressful mess was completely under control. The father observed the entire scene from his study window. For the first time, he felt a twinge of respect, and perhaps even shock. He realized that intelligence and competence were not always loud or obvious. Sometimes, they came quietly, in moments of calm, in thoughtful actions rather than in boasts or displays of power. Over the following days, this pattern continued. The young woman showed her intelligence not by arguing or proving herself, but by consistently demonstrating competence, kindness, and patience. She listened more than she spoke, thought before she acted, and made decisions that left others impressed without making them feel threatened. Even in moments when the father tried to undermine her, she responded calmly, never letting his sharp words shake her. Her calm response began to shift the household. The staff began to speak more highly of her, noting her intelligence, grace, and ability to handle pressure. The son's friends started noticing how his fiancée carried herself with dignity, even in a house full of wealth, pride, and judgment. And most importantly, the father began to realize that perhaps he had underestimated her. By the end of this week, it was clear, the young woman was no ordinary fiancée. She was someone who could stand tall even when doubted, someone whose calm intelligence could command respect without demanding it, and someone whose quiet strength had begun to leave an impression on the man who had laughed at her just days before. The tension that had filled the mansion began to change, subtle, almost invisible at first, but undeniable. The billionaire father had entered this week believing she was foolish, but as he watched her handle every challenge with grace, he began to question everything he thought he knew about her. The young woman's calm composure had already begun to unsettle the billionaire father, but what happened next would truly test his judgment and change everything. For days, he had watched her quietly, unable to reconcile his earlier opinion of her with the intelligence and patience she displayed in small, everyday moments. Yet, in his mind, he still held on to the belief that she might be clever by coincidence, that perhaps her composure was just luck. He had no idea that she was about to prove him wrong in a way that he would never forget. It all started one afternoon when the family faced a problem that seemed simple on the surface but had far-reaching consequences. A major deal connected to the father's business empire had hit a snag. Documents were misplaced, schedules were misaligned, and key partners were growing impatient. The staff were panicking, moving from room to room, trying to find solutions. Even the son, normally calm and capable, looked concerned. It was a situation that required quick thinking, clear judgment, and precision. Without being asked, the young woman stepped in. She did not complain, argue, or question her authority. Instead, she calmly assessed the situation, reviewing the documents, identifying the errors, and mapping out a plan of action. Her approach was methodical, her observations precise. She pointed out where the mistakes had occurred, suggested practical solutions, and assigned tasks to the right people in a way that restored order almost immediately. Within the hour, what had seemed like a looming disaster was completely under control. The father, who had been observing from a distance, could hardly believe what he was seeing. Here was the woman he had called foolish, managing a high-pressure situation with more clarity and efficiency than many executives he had known. He felt a mixture of shock, disbelief, and, unwillingly, admiration. She did not seek recognition, she did not demand praise. She simply solved the problem with competence and grace. Word of her success spread quickly through the mansion. The staff spoke in hushed, impressed tones, while the son looked at her with newfound pride. Even the father, though reluctant to admit it, found himself studying her every move, realizing that this young woman possessed something rare, an intelligence that was subtle yet profound, a courage that did not need to be loud, and a presence that inspired trust without demanding it. But her unexpected move did not stop there. Over the next few days, she began to show her problem-solving skills in other areas. She suggested improvements to daily operations, offered creative solutions to minor family disputes, and even mediated a disagreement between senior staff members that had lingered for months. Each action was small on its own, yet together they painted a picture of someone capable, thoughtful, and remarkably wise. The father, who had prided himself on his ability to judge people quickly, began to feel an unfamiliar emotion, uncertainty. He realized that he had underestimated her, that his initial laughter and dismissal had been premature. The woman he had laughed at, called foolish, and doubted at every turn was quietly demonstrating qualities that even he could not ignore. She was proving that intelligence, patience, and courage were more powerful than wealth or status alone. The son watched these interactions with admiration and awe. He had loved her for her kindness and heart, but now he saw a side of her that was truly extraordinary. She was not only his partner but someone who could stand alongside him, facing challenges calmly, confidently, and with unwavering integrity. By the end of the week, the atmosphere in the mansion had begun to shift. Where tension and doubt once lingered, respect was starting to grow. The father, while still proud and protective of his own opinions, could no longer dismiss her. He began to see that her intelligence was not a threat, it was an asset, a quality that could complement the family and even strengthen it. For the young woman, none of this was about winning approval or proving someone wrong. She simply acted as herself, trusting that her actions, not words, would speak louder than any criticism. And in doing so, she had accomplished something remarkable. She had begun to change the mind of a man who had once laughed at her, and in the process, she was earning a place not just in his son's heart, but in his respect as well. Her unexpected move was more than just a display of intelligence, it was a lesson in courage, patience, and integrity. It showed that true strength is quiet, measured, and revealed through action, not boastful claims. And as the father watched her handle challenge after challenge, he could not help but wonder, perhaps he had judged the wrong person entirely. The calm confidence of the young woman had already begun to unsettle the billionaire father, but no one could have predicted what would happen next. The true test of her abilities came in a way that nobody saw coming, a sudden, high-stakes crisis that threatened not only the family business but the reputation and future of everyone involved. It began early one morning when the father received devastating news. A critical investment deal, one that was meant to secure the company's position in an international market, had gone wrong. Key partners had withdrawn, a legal issue had emerged, and the company faced a financial setback that could ripple through multiple divisions. Panic immediately spread through the office, and even the father, usually unshakable in the face of problems, felt a rare twinge of anxiety. The son tried to handle the situation, calling meetings and attempting to find solutions, but every effort seemed to hit a wall. The staff were overwhelmed, deadlines were looming, and tension filled the air. The father paced his office, frustrated and anxious, realizing that the problem required not just authority, but creativity, quick thinking, and a calm mind. It was then that the young woman stepped forward. She had been observing quietly, taking notes, and analyzing the situation as it unfolded. She did not hesitate or wait for instructions, she simply began to act. Her approach was methodical. She broke down the problem into smaller parts, identified the core issues, and devised a step-by-step plan to manage each one. She coordinated with legal teams, contacted partners with persuasive clarity, and proposed alternative strategies that nobody had considered. The father, watching from his office window, could hardly believe what he was seeing. This was the same woman he had dismissed as foolish just days before. She was now directing people, making critical decisions, and handling the pressure with a poise that he had rarely seen, even in seasoned executives. Each choice she made was precise, deliberate, and effective. Within hours, the chaos began to subside. The staff, once frantic and overwhelmed, moved with confidence, guided by her calm and strategic leadership. But the most shocking moment came when she addressed the international partners directly. Using honesty, logic, and an understanding of human behavior, she managed to rebuild trust, negotiate solutions, and even secure more favorable terms than before. Her ability to read people and respond effectively left everyone astonished. Even the father, who prided himself on his judgment, was forced to acknowledge that she had handled a situation that he himself might have struggled to manage. By the end of the day, the crisis had been resolved. The company's reputation was intact, financial stability restored, and the staff looked at her with admiration and gratitude. The father, however, remained silent, pacing his office and replaying every decision she had made. For the first time, he realized that he had been wrong to judge her by appearances or background. She had demonstrated not only intelligence but resilience, courage, and an extraordinary ability to lead under pressure. The son could barely contain his pride. He had always known she was special, but seeing her navigate a crisis of this magnitude was beyond anything he had imagined. His respect and love for her deepened, and he could see that the father's skepticism was slowly giving way to recognition. That evening, the father summoned her into his office. The room, usually tense during their interactions, felt charged with anticipation. He studied her silently for a moment, trying to measure the woman who had turned what seemed like disaster into triumph. Then, with a deep sigh, he spoke in a tone that was unusually measured. "You handled today with skill, intelligence, and courage. I will admit, I underestimated you," he said, a rare hint of respect in his voice. The young woman nodded gracefully, accepting the acknowledgement without arrogance or boastfulness. She understood that this was only the beginning of earning true respect, not just from him but from the world around her. The father's recognition, though significant, was not her goal. She had acted because it was the right thing to do, because she believed in herself and in the people she supported. That day became a turning point, not only in how the father viewed her but in the dynamics of the entire household. She had proven that intelligence, calmness, and integrity could accomplish what arrogance and wealth alone could not. From that moment forward, no one could call her foolish. Her actions had spoken louder than words, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who had doubted her. The young woman's unexpected brilliance had shifted the balance of respect in the mansion. The billionaire father, once confident in his judgments, now had to confront the truth. Appearances can be deceiving, and true strength often comes quietly, revealed only through action, courage, and wisdom. The days following the crisis were quiet, but in the billionaire father's mind, chaos raged. He had always been a man who believed in control, in logic, and in the power of wealth and status. He had built his empire on sharp judgment, intuition, and experience. Yet now, he found himself facing a truth that unsettled him deeply. He had misjudged the young woman he had once called foolish. At first, he resisted the realization. He told himself that perhaps the success during the crisis was just luck, that the circumstances had been unusually favorable, and that anyone could have handled them given the same opportunity. But deep down, he knew this was not true. The young woman had not stumbled into a solution. She had seen the problem clearly, understood its complexities, and taken deliberate, intelligent action. She had acted with calmness, courage, and insight that he had rarely witnessed, even in his most trusted executives. He remembered how she had addressed the international partners, the way she had spoken with honesty and clarity, and how effortlessly she had turned a potential disaster into an opportunity. He realized that in his world of power, he had rarely met anyone who could balance intelligence with grace, strategy with humility, and courage with patience. For the first time, he felt an uncomfortable mix of awe and humility. The father began to reflect on his own behavior toward her. How many times had he dismissed her questions, laughed at her mistakes, or doubted her abilities simply because she did not fit into his narrow definition of intelligence? He felt a pang of guilt as he recalled his harsh words, the laughter he had shared with friends at her expense, and the moments he had looked down on her quietly in his mind. For all his wealth and influence, he realized that his arrogance had blinded him to something far more valuable than money: character, wisdom, and heart. Over the next few days, he observed her more closely, not with judgment, but with curiosity. He watched her interactions with the staff, noticing how people trusted and respected her instantly. He watched her with his son, noticing the subtle ways she encouraged him, supported him, and challenged him when necessary. He even saw her quiet moments, when she reflected and considered her actions carefully, and he understood that her strength was not loud or aggressive. It was steady, consistent, and deeply intelligent. He began to understand a truth he had long ignored: real value is not always obvious. It does not come with flashy displays of wealth or the loud assertions of superiority. Sometimes, it is quiet, humble, and revealed only in moments of crisis, patience, and courage. And she, the woman he had underestimated, embodied that truth perfectly. The realization changed him profoundly. He began to question not just his judgments about her, but about the assumptions he had carried throughout his life. How many other people had he dismissed too quickly? How many opportunities had he missed because he measured intelligence and worth through narrow criteria? For the first time, he recognized that respect must be earned through actions and character, not simply through titles or appearances. One evening, as he sat alone in his study, he replayed the events of the past weeks in his mind. He thought about the dinner, the quiet calm she had maintained, and the way she had handled the business crisis with unparalleled skill. He realized that he had been wrong, completely wrong. And while the truth was uncomfortable, it was also enlightening. He felt a new sense of admiration, a respect that he had never expected to feel. The father also understood that this revelation had deeper implications for his family. His son had chosen wisely, and it was not wealth or status that mattered most in a life partner. It was wisdom, courage, and integrity. The young woman had proven herself not only to him but to everyone who had doubted her, and she had done it without arrogance, without force, simply through her actions. By the end of that week, the billionaire father had changed. He began to treat her differently, not with skepticism, but with cautious respect. He engaged her in conversations, sought her advice on minor matters, and even listened when she suggested solutions or ideas. For the first time, he recognized that he could learn from her, that she brought a perspective he had overlooked, and that true intelligence and strength were far more complex than he had imagined. The father's realization was profound. Underestimating someone based on first impressions or social background could blind even the most experienced minds. He had laughed at her, doubted her, and called her foolish, but now he knew the truth. She was not foolish at all. She was remarkable, capable, and destined to leave a lasting impact on their lives. And in that recognition, the father began to see not only her value, but a new path for himself, a path where humility, understanding, and respect mattered as much as power, wealth, and control. After the father's quiet but profound realization, the mansion slowly began to feel different. The tension that had once filled every room was lifting, replaced by a sense of cautious curiosity and growing respect. The young woman, who had once been dismissed as foolish, was no longer just the son's fiancée. She was becoming an undeniable part of the family's world, not because of wealth or influence, but because of who she truly was. The first sign of change came from the staff. Those who had once whispered doubts about her now spoke in admiration. They noticed how she treated everyone with kindness, how she never raised her voice, and how she solved problems with intelligence and patience. Even the housekeepers, who had initially feared her presence, began seeking her guidance in small matters, trusting her judgment without hesitation. This ripple effect through the household was subtle, but it did not go unnoticed by the father. He watched quietly, realizing that respect earned in action was far more powerful than respect demanded by authority. Family, friends, and relatives visiting the mansion also began to see the shift. The young woman's reputation for grace, intelligence, and quiet strength spread quickly. At first, some were skeptical, as many had heard the father's initial doubts. But when they witnessed her calm confidence and thoughtful approach to challenges, even the most judgmental relatives began to change their opinions. They saw that she could navigate difficult conversations, manage delicate situations, and support the son with unwavering loyalty and wisdom. The turning point in her acceptance came during a formal family gathering. The father, still careful in his words, invited her to contribute to discussions that mattered, matters he had once handled alone. She spoke with clarity, offering suggestions that were both practical and insightful. The room, which had previously held silent judgment, now buzzed with a quiet appreciation. The relatives and guests noticed that her ideas carried weight, that she spoke not to impress, but to help, and that her presence elevated the conversation rather than disrupting it. Even the son's cousins, who had once mocked her simplicity, began to approach her with respect. They observed how she handled each interaction with grace, and how she balanced humility with quiet confidence. Slowly, she began to feel like she truly belonged, not as someone tolerated, but as someone valued. Each kind word, thoughtful action, and subtle gesture of wisdom strengthened her position in the family, and she never let pride or arrogance overshadow her behavior. The father's acceptance, while gradual, was the most significant. He no longer doubted her abilities or questioned her place in the family. Instead, he observed her with a mixture of admiration and pride. He even began seeking her opinion on matters that once seemed far beyond her realm. This shift in their relationship was subtle but profound. The father, who had once laughed at her and dismissed her as foolish, now recognized her as someone who could teach, inspire, and even influence the family's decisions in meaningful ways. It was not just the father who changed, he also guided the rest of the family to see her differently. He subtly praised her intelligence in conversations, shared her contributions with relatives, and encouraged his son to value her not only as a partner but as a trusted member of the family. Slowly, everyone followed his lead. The household that had once been filled with judgment now felt warm, welcoming, and united, and the young woman's calm presence became a source of stability rather than tension. By the end of this period, the young woman had earned more than acceptance. She had earned admiration, respect, and trust. She had transformed the household not by trying to impress anyone or by asserting herself forcefully, but simply by being who she was, intelligent, patient, compassionate, and courageous. Her ability to handle challenges with grace and to remain calm under pressure had changed not only the father's perspective but the dynamics of the entire family. Through her quiet perseverance, she had achieved what few could. She had bridged the gap between skepticism and trust, doubt and respect, judgment and admiration. The billionaire father, once certain that she was foolish and unfit, now acknowledged her as an essential part of the family. In doing so, he had learned one of life's most important lessons, that true worth is measured not by wealth, background, or appearances, but by character, integrity, and the strength of one's actions. By the time the young woman had fully earned the family's acceptance, the mansion that once echoed with doubt and judgment had transformed into a place of respect, warmth, and admiration. What had begun as a test of patience, character, and resilience had grown into something far deeper, a story of lessons learned, boundaries broken, and hearts changed. The billionaire father, who had laughed at her and dismissed her as foolish, now found himself reflecting on the events with a humility he had never expected to feel. It was not an easy transformation. The father had built his life on certainty, on experience, on the belief that success and intelligence could be measured in money, status, and sharp decision-making. Yet, this young woman had quietly proven that there was another kind of intelligence, a subtler, more powerful kind, one rooted in patience, empathy, courage, and integrity. Her actions, rather than her words, had shifted the father's understanding of what truly mattered in life. The son watched all of this unfold with quiet pride. He had loved her for her kindness and heart, but now he saw a woman whose wisdom and strength could withstand scrutiny, navigate crises, and inspire those around her. He realized that the love he felt was not just emotional, it was deeply rooted in admiration and respect for someone who had the courage to be herself, even under immense pressure. Family dinners no longer carried tension or judgment. Conversations flowed naturally, laughter returned to the halls, and the young woman's presence became a source of calm and guidance. She did not try to dominate or impress, yet people looked to her for insight, for wisdom, and for reassurance. Even the father, once harsh and unyielding, now consulted her in matters he had once handled alone. Her advice, always practical yet insightful, often led to solutions that surpassed even his expectations. One afternoon, the father reflected privately on the lessons he had learned. He realized that he had allowed pride, arrogance, and social assumptions to cloud his judgment. He had laughed at someone who did not fit his narrow expectations, failing to recognize her potential. In doing so, he had nearly missed an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to expand his own understanding of value, intelligence, and courage. He also realized that this experience had changed more than just his opinion of his son's fiancée, it had changed him as a person. He had learned humility, patience, and the power of observing before judging. He had learned that strength is not always loud or obvious, that true leadership includes respect for others regardless of their background, and that wisdom can come from unexpected places. The young woman, unaware of the internal reflections she had inspired, continued to live with the same grace and intelligence she had shown from the beginning. She did not boast, she did not seek validation, yet her influence was undeniable. Through quiet perseverance and steady courage, she had rewritten the story of her own life and had reshaped the dynamics of a family that had once doubted her. The son, standing by her side, felt a deep sense of security and pride. He knew that life would have challenges ahead, but he also knew that together, they could face anything. Their partnership was built not just on love, but on mutual respect, trust, and the understanding that true value lies in character, resilience, and courage. In the end, the greatest lesson of all was clear: first impressions can be deceiving, and judgments made without understanding can blind even the most experienced minds. The father's laughter, the initial dismissal, and the doubts that had filled the mansion were replaced by a profound truth: wisdom, strength, and worth are not always measured by wealth, status, or outward appearances. They are revealed through action, patience, courage, and the quiet confidence to remain true to oneself. The young woman's journey, from being laughed at to earning the father's respect, became a story that inspired everyone around her. It was a reminder that underestimating someone can be a costly mistake, and that the greatest transformations often come not from force or power, but from quiet resilience and integrity. In the heart of that grand mansion, the billionaire father finally understood what it truly meant to see someone for who they really were, and he would never forget it.